Wonderful. Who is Mr. Wonderful? Let me tell you, this is a new generation. You're looking at...
Nobody ever saw it coming. The heartbreaking downfall of Dr. Death, Steve Williams. He was a powerhouse in the ring, a real tough guy who seemed almost unstoppable. But in the end, it wasn't an opponent that took him down. It was something far more cruel. Throat cancer ended his life way too soon, and it's a tragedy that still hits hard. So today, let's take a closer look at what really happened to Steve Williams and how his story took such a heartbreaking turn. Steve Williams' story took a heartbreaking turn in his later years, and a big part of that was his battle with throat cancer. It was a fight that really shook the wrestling world. Known as Dr. Death, he had a reputation for being one of the toughest men to ever step inside a wrestling ring. So when news broke that he was fighting something as serious as cancer, it didn't seem real. He was a warrior, strong, fearless, and larger than life. At first, it looked like he beat it. He was declared cancer-free and even made an incredible return to the ring, showing everyone that he still had that fighting spirit. But sadly, the cancer came back, and this time, it was too much. In 2009, at just 49 years old, Steve Williams passed away. It was a loss that hit hard, and for many fans, it was even more shocking than the drug troubles he had faced earlier in life. You see, Williams' struggles didn't start with cancer. Back in 1988, he was reportedly caught with a stash of drugs that included cocaine, marijuana, mushrooms, barbiturates, and steroids. That incident was just the start of a string of problems that followed him. He ran into trouble at airports in both Texas and Michigan, getting arrested for drug-related issues. In 1994, things got even worse when he was detained at a Japanese airport. That incident led to a one-year ban from wrestling in Japan, one of the places where he was actually a big star. Eventually, he was allowed back, but the damage had already been done. The image of Dr. Death had taken a serious hit. Even with those setbacks, Steve Williams still had big moments left in his career. In 1998, he joined WWE, still called WWF at the time, and there were huge plans for him. The company saw him as a legit tough guy who could go toe-to-toe with their top stars. In fact, there were early talks about setting up a major feud between Williams and Stone Cold Steve Austin. That could have been career-changing, but then came one of the strangest and most damaging ideas in WWE history, the Brawl for All tournament. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the Brawl for All was a real-life tough men competition where wrestlers had to box each other for real. No scripts, no acting, just fists flying. The whole thing was the brainchild of Vince Russo, and to this day, it's looked back on as a complete disaster. Williams was expected to dominate the tournament. With his legit background in amateur wrestling and his reputation for being a real bruiser, he seemed like a sure bet to win it all. But wrestling is full of surprises, sometimes the bad kind. In the second round of the tournament, Williams went up against Bart Gunn, and in a moment that stunned everyone, Bart knocked him out cold. That one punch didn't just end a match, it ended Williams' momentum in WWE. The company had been ready to push him into the main event scene, but after that loss, all those plans were scrapped. On top of that, Williams suffered a torn hamstring during the fight, which only made things worse. His WWE run, which had started with so much hope, was suddenly going nowhere. Looking back, the knockout in Brawl for All was more than just a loss, it was a turning point. It knocked him off the big stage in WWE, and while he still wrestled in other promotions after that, he never quite reached the same level again. Combine that with his earlier drug issues and the heartbreaking battle with cancer, and you get the full picture of a man who went through more than his fair share of pain. It's just as important to remember everything he accomplished in his career too. So let's take a look back, shall we? His pro wrestling journey officially began in 1982, when he was trained by none other than Bill Watts and Buddy Landel, two seasoned veterans who saw serious potential in him. Williams broke into the business through Mid-South Wrestling, the gritty, hard-hitting promotion run by Watts himself. With his legit athletic background and raw intensity, it didn't take long for Williams to make an impression. Fans were drawn to his physical style, and promoters saw star potential. By 1985, just a few years into his career, he was already getting major opportunities. One of his earliest big angles came when he teamed up with Ted DiBiase in a fierce and memorable feud against Eddie Gilbert and the Nightmare. The rivalry was intense, filled with brutal brawls and high drama, just the kind of spotlight Williams needed to raise his profile. Then in 1986, a big shift happened. Mid-South Wrestling rebranded itself as the Universal Wrestling Federation, aiming to go national. This was a turning point, not just for the promotion, but for Williams too. The new branding brought more attention, more TV time, and a bigger stage, and Williams took full advantage of it. That same year, he captured the UWF Heavyweight Championship by defeating Big Bubba Rogers. It was a defining moment. No longer just a promising athlete, Williams had officially arrived as a top-tier talent. His victory showed that he wasn't just a powerhouse. He had the skill, presence, and toughness to carry a promotion. When Jim Crockett Promotions bought out the UWF in 1987, only a few wrestlers from that roster got a real push in the new setup, and Williams was one of them. He appeared regularly in the NWA and Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and even had stints in World Class and New Japan Pro Wrestling. In 1988, he got caught up in a wild storyline involving Jimmy Garvin, Kevin Sullivan, and the Varsity Club. Williams first fought against them, but then flipped sides and joined the Varsity Club later that year. He won tag titles alongside Sullivan and later with Mike Rotunda, taking on some of the top teams like the Road Warriors. By mid-1989, the Varsity Club had broken up, and Williams switched back to being a good guy. He had a short feud with Rotunda and then got into a storyline with Lex Luger. Williams was supposed to challenge Luger for the US title at Wrestle War 1990, but plans changed after Sting got injured, and Luger was bumped up to the main event. Shortly after that, Williams left the company. But his story didn't slow down. He jumped to Japan and wrestled at the Tokyo Dome in early 1990, beating Salman Hashimikov. Then he made a major move to All Japan Pro Wrestling, teaming up with Terry Gordy to form the Miracle Violence Connection. They'd actually started teaming back in the Crockett days, but Japan took them to another level. In March 1990, they beat legends Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu for the AJPW Tag Team titles. Throughout the early 90s, Williams split time between All Japan and New Japan, which was unusual back then. But by 1991, he was full-time in All Japan and a fan favorite. In 1992, he and Gordy even returned to WCW for a brief run, winning the WCW tag titles and making it to the finals of the NWA Tag Team Tournament. They had wars with the Steiner brothers and the Dangerous Alliance before eventually dropping the titles and heading back to Japan. Williams continued to rise in Japan. In 1994, he beat Mitsuharu Misawa for the prestigious Triple Crown Championship, one of the biggest moments of his career. Over the years, he defeated top names like Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, building his legacy as one of the most successful foreign wrestlers in Japanese history. His final match in All Japan's first run came in 1998, where he gave a heartfelt farewell to Giant Baba and the fans before heading to the WWF. In the late 1990s, Williams made a notable appearance in Extreme Championship Wrestling. At the event Crossing the Line Again in February 1997, he faced Raven for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. Despite a valiant effort, Williams suffered his first defeat in the United States in over a decade, marking a significant moment in his career. Williams' reputation as a formidable wrestler caught the attention of the World Wrestling Federation, leading to his signing in May 1998. He was brought in with high expectations, particularly for the Brawl for All tournament, a series of legitimate fights among wrestlers. Unfortunately, during a match against Bart Gunn, Williams suffered a torn quadriceps and was knocked out, derailing his momentum and leading to a period of recovery. After healing, Williams returned to WWF in early 1999, engaging in various storylines, including a brief partnership with commentator Jim Ross. He also had feuds with wrestlers like Hardcore Holly and Tiger Ali Singh. Despite these efforts, Williams was released from WWF in April 1999, partly due to lingering injuries and creative differences. Seeking new opportunities, Williams briefly joined World Championship Wrestling later that year. He participated in matches alongside manager Oklahoma and feuded with wrestlers like Vampiro. However, his time in WCW was short-lived, And by the end of 1999, he returned to All Japan Pro Wrestling, where he had previously found significant success. In AJPW, Williams revitalized his career, forming a tag team with Big Van Vader and capturing the World Tag Team Championship. He engaged in memorable feuds with wrestlers such as Toshiaki Kawada and Keiji Muto, showcasing his enduring talent and determination. Williams continued to wrestle in Japan until early 2003, when he decided to focus on opportunities in the United States. Back in the US, Williams worked with various independent promotions, including the Christian Wrestling Federation, where he became the heavyweight champion. His commitment to his faith was evident, as he used his platform to inspire others and share his beliefs. In March 2004, Williams faced his toughest opponent yet, throat cancer. He underwent surgery and by March 2005 was declared cancer-free. Demonstrating his indomitable spirit, Williams returned to the ring, wrestling matches and mentoring young talent in Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's developmental territory. Williams continued to make appearances in various wrestling promotions, sharing his experiences and inspiring others with his story of perseverance. After the tragic death of his friend and rival, Mitsuharu Misawa in 2009, Williams decided to retire from wrestling. His final match took place in August 2009, where he won the ACW Heavyweight Championship before vacating the title and stepping away from the ring. Steve "Dr. Death" Williams passed away on December 29, 2009. His legacy lives on through his contributions to professional wrestling and the countless lives he touched with his resilience and unwavering faith. That brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Brian Pillman's death is one of the saddest stories in wrestling. He passed away from heart failure at just 35 years old, way too young and way too suddenly. But honestly, the pain didn't start there. His life had been full of struggles long before his health started to fall apart. From tough childhood days to nonstop injuries and personal battles, it always felt like Brian was fighting something. His death was heartbreaking, but sadly, it was the tragic final chapter of a life that had been rough from the start. Brian Pillman's life was filled with struggle from the very beginning. As a baby, he was constantly in and out of hospitals. He had a rare condition that caused multiple growths, called polyps, in his throat, and doctors had to operate on him over 30 times before he even turned 3. Just imagine that. Dozens of surgeries before most kids can even speak clearly. That's actually what gave him his famously raspy voice, a sound that would stick with him for the rest of his life and later become part of his wrestling persona. But the battles didn't stop when he left the hospital. As a kid, Pillman also had a tough time in school. He struggled academically and needed tutoring just to stay eligible to play sports. Still, he pushed through because sports were his escape, his way of fighting back against everything life kept throwing at him. Eventually, he found his place in the wrestling world, where his wild energy and intense presence made him stand out. But then came another life-changing moment, a terrible single-car accident. The crash left him with badly damaged ankles. His injuries were so severe that doctors had to insert metal plates just so he could walk, let alone wrestle. He went through multiple surgeries and his mobility was never the same. But Brian wasn't ready to slow down. He rushed back into the ring, trying to keep his career alive, but doing so meant living with constant pain. And that pain led him down a dangerous path, relying heavily on painkillers just to keep going. On top of the painkillers, there were also reports of steroid use. All of this, his injuries, the pills, the pressure to perform, created a storm that was getting harder and harder for him to control. Brian's personal life wasn't any easier. He had children with more than one woman, and his family life was complicated and filled with tension. His first wife, Rochelle, went through a traumatic experience when she was the victim of a violent attack. Later, she died by suicide, something that reportedly had a deep emotional impact on Brian. Then came his relationship with Melanie, his second wife. That marriage had its own share of problems, and after Brian's sudden death, things got even messier. There were serious questions and controversies surrounding how his estate was handled, leaving behind even more heartbreak for his family and fans. He may have only lived 35 years, but Brian Pillman's impact on the world of wrestling is impossible to ignore. So let's dive in and take a closer look at the legacy he left behind, shall we? Brian Pillman's wrestling journey kicked off in November 1986 with Stampede Wrestling, Stu Hart's legendary Calgary-based promotion. Right out of the gate, Pillman teamed up with Bruce Hart, Stu's son, and together they formed a tag team called Bad Company. It's important not to confuse them with the similarly named Bad Company from the US Bad Company made a quick impact. By April 1987, they captured the Stampede International Tag Team Championship after winning a tournament final against Ron Starr and the Cuban Assassin. Their first title reign was solid, but controversy hit in October when a disputed match against Jerry Morrow and Makan Singh led to the belts being held up. Pillman and Bruce Hart reclaimed the titles in a rematch the following month and held them until July 1988, when Morrow and the Cuban Assassin finally dethroned them. During his Stampede run, Pillman used a clever strategy to get fans emotionally invested in his character. His girlfriend at the time, Trisha Hayes, posed as his sister and sat ringside. Heel wrestlers would target her to generate heat, giving Pillman the perfect excuse to come to the rescue and build sympathy from the crowd. His last night in Stampede came on August 13, 1988, when he teamed with Bruce Hart and the masked Jason the Terrible to beat the Great Gamma, Makan Singh, and Johnny Smith in the main event. With Stampede in his rearview, Pillman moved south to Memphis to work for the Continental Wrestling Association. In 1989, Pillman briefly ventured to Japan for New Japan Pro Wrestling's Battle Line Tokyo Dome Tour. He squared off against stars like Masa Saito and Tatsumi Fujinami, and even teamed with Big Van Vader in a tag match. This trip added more layers to his developing in-ring style. That summer, he returned stateside and joined World Championship Wrestling, where he became known as Flying Brian. With his quick speed, drop kicks, and aerial attacks, he stood out immediately. Pillman wasn't just fast, he was fearless. One of the first American wrestlers to mix lucha libre moves into his arsenal, he helped bring a new flavor to WCW's style. He found early success teaming with Tom Zank, aka Z-Man, and together they won the NWA United States Tag Team titles in early 1990. Though the reign didn't last long, it gave fans a glimpse of Pillman's potential. After that, he entered a quirky phase where he donned a mask and called himself the Yellow Dog. This was all part of a storyline after losing a Loser Leaves WCW match, a common wrestling twist. Despite the disguise, fans knew who it was, and the gimmick added to his growing reputation as a versatile performer. Between 1991 and 1992, Pillman became a cornerstone of WCW's light heavyweight division. He held the WCW Light Heavyweight Championship twice, clashing with standout names like Brad Armstrong, Jushin Thunder Liger, and Scotty Flamingo. Pillman also spent time wrestling in Japan during this period. He worked matches in Tokyo and Nagoya, teaming with American stars like Tim Horner and Z-Man against Japanese legends such as Shiro Koshinaka and Kuniaki Kobayashi. His exposure to different styles continued sharpening his in-ring craft. In late 1992, frustrated by title setbacks and changes, Pillman turned heel. He formed a short-lived but intense team with Barry Windham, aiming for the NWA and WCW tag titles. They clashed with Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas at Starrcade, but fell short. When Windham moved on to chase singles gold, Pillman pivoted again. That's when he teamed up with stunning Steve Austin, forming the unforgettable duo known as the Hollywood Blondes. Their chemistry was instant. In March 1993, they won the WCW and NWA Tag Team Championships from Steamboat and Douglas and became one of the most entertaining parts of WCW television. They mocked the Four Horsemen, especially Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, even spoofing Flair's talk segment with a parody called A Flair for the Old. Unfortunately, the duo's run was cut short by injury and backstage politics. Pillman hurt his leg, and Lord Steven Regal had to fill in for him during a key match where they lost the titles to Anderson and Paul Roma. After the Blondes split up in late 1993, Pillman returned to singles action as a babyface. He feuded with his former partner Austin and chased the WCW Television Championship, coming close but never quite capturing it. After a quiet spell, he returned in early 1995, almost repackaged as California Brian, a short-lived idea that didn't stick. He played up a Hollywood persona, claiming he had been filming Baywatch, and slid into a tweener role, bouncing between hero and villain depending on the night. That fall, Pillman joined forces with Arn Anderson and reignited his feud with Ric Flair. On the first ever episode of WCW Monday Nitro in September 1995, he wrestled and defeated Jushin Liger in a high-energy rematch from their Super Brawl II clash. At Halloween Havoc, Pillman and Anderson teamed up against Flair and Sting. In a twist, Flair turned on Sting mid-match, revealing he had aligned with Pillman and Anderson all along. The Four Horsemen were officially back, this time featuring Flair, Anderson, Pillman, and Chris Benoit. Around the same time, Pillman dove deep into a character transformation. Gone was the clean-cut Flying Brian. In his place came the Loose Cannon, a wild, unpredictable persona that blurred the lines between fiction and reality. Dressed in leather vests, graphic t-shirts, and sunglasses, Pillman embraced chaos. Even his own horseman allies weren't sure if they could trust him. His new persona led to several real-life uncomfortable moments. During a match with Eddie Guerrero at Clash of the Champions 32, Pillman suddenly grabbed commentator Bobby Heenan, who had a history of neck issues, causing Heenan to drop an unplanned F-bomb on live TV. That moment cemented Pillman's loose cannon reputation. The chaos continued at Super Brawl VI in February 1996. He faced Kevin Sullivan in an I Respect You strap match, but broke character mid-match, grabbing the mic and saying, "I respect you, Booker man," outing Sullivan as the show's real-life booker. The moment was so shocking, WCW edited it out of replays. The next day, Eric Bischoff fired Pillman, but some say it was all part of a plan. Bischoff later claimed they orchestrated the firing to allow Pillman to go to ECW, build his wild man image further, then return to WCW hotter than ever. But that plan backfired. Pillman didn't return. Instead, he popped up in ECW in the most unpredictable way possible. At ECW CyberSlam in February 1996, Pillman hijacked an in-ring interview, cursed out Bischoff, insulted the ECW fans, and even threatened to expose himself in the ring. It was all part of the act, but the crowd wasn't sure what to believe. Security dragged him out of the building, but Pillman made sure everyone knew, whether it was WCW, ECW, or somewhere else, he wasn't just another wrestler anymore. He then officially joined the WWF on June 10, 1996. His signing was announced at a press conference, and it marked a major step in Vince McMahon's shift toward locking in talent with guaranteed contracts. WCW had already swiped away stars like Lex Luger, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall, so Vince wasn't taking any more chances. Pillman was actually the second WWF star to sign a guaranteed deal, right after Mark Mero. At first, Pillman wasn't ready to wrestle. He was still recovering from a badly broken ankle, so instead he showed up as a commentator, staying in the spotlight while healing. But he didn't stay quiet for long. Just weeks later, on an episode of WWF Superstars in Detroit, he jumped into the action by attacking a fan who had gotten out of line, signaling that he was ready to return. Things got wild later that year. On November 4th, 1996 episode of Raw, Pillman was involved in one of the most controversial storylines in wrestling history, what's now called the Pillman's Got a Gun segment. It all started when Pillman, who had once been close friends with Steve Austin, started siding with Austin's rival, Bret Hart. Austin didn't take that lightly. On October 27th, during an interview on Superstars, Austin snapped and viciously attacked Pillman in the ring. The feud kept heating up until Austin decided to confront Pillman at his home in Kentucky. WWF cameras were already set up inside, along with interviewer Kevin Kelly, Pillman's wife Melanie, and some of Pillman's friends who were there for protection. But as the interview went on, Pillman grew more and more intense. Suddenly, he pulled out a handgun and shouted, "When Austin 316 meets Pillman, 9mm, I'm gonna blast his sorry ass straight to hell." Austin showed up and fought off Pillman's friends, forcing his way into the house. Just as he was about to reach Pillman, the gun was raised, and then the screen went black. Fans watching at home had no idea what was real or fake. Moments later, the feed returned with Pillman yelling and pointing the gun, while his friends dragged Austin out. He even cursed live on TV, yelling, "Get out of the fucking way!" The WWF ended up apologizing for the segment due to the backlash. After WrestleMania 13, Pillman officially returned to the ring and joined the Hart Foundation alongside Bret Hart, Owen Hart, British Bulldog, and Jim Neidhart, close friends from his Stampede wrestling days. Now a heel, Pillman reignited his feud with Austin. One memorable moment from their rivalry was when Austin crushed Pillman's ankle between a chair, a move that later became known as the Pillmanizer. By May 1997, Pillman was wrestling regularly, often teaming up with the Hart Foundation. At In Your House Canadian Stampede, he took part in a 10-man tag match, helping the Hart Foundation beat Austin's team in Calgary. Later, Pillman entered a bizarre feud with Goldust, centered around Goldust's real-life wife, Marlena. After losing to Goldust at SummerSlam, Pillman was forced to wear a dress for a month. Then he upped the stakes. He'd win Marlena as his personal assistant if he beat Goldust, or leave the WWF if he lost. At In Your House Ground Zero, Pillman won. It was his final pay-per-view appearance before his tragic death. His last televised match came on Shotgun Saturday Night, where he beat the Patriot by disqualification just days before he passed away. And that wraps up today's video. You know the drill. Don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button too.
Happy that she chose me because I want to get in that ring against Moolah. It'll be the thing I have worked for 4.5 years.
The story of how the fabulous Moolah ruined Wendy Richter has to be one of the wildest scandals in wrestling history. Not only did Wendy have some serious issues with Moolah, but the things she later revealed about her, absolutely shocking. Fans were left speechless. So what really happened? And what did Wendy say that had everyone so disturbed? Let's break it all down. The infamous screw job that ended Richter's title reign didn't just cost her the championship. It completely shattered what little relationship she had left with the fabulous Moolah. To be honest, their bond had already been rocky for a long time. Wendy never held back her feelings about Moolah. She openly admitted she didn't like her and believed Moolah went out of her way to hurt her during matches. But it didn't stop there. According to Wendy, Moolah wasn't just a problem inside the ring. She claimed Moolah ran a training school where students weren't properly taught and were often taken advantage of, especially when it came to money. In Wendy's eyes, Moolah didn't just hurt individual careers, she made the entire business look bad, especially for women trying to break through in a male-dominated industry. The way Wendy lost her title in that screw job wasn't just personal. It revealed something much bigger. It exposed just how shaky things were for women's wrestling in the WWF back then. One moment, Wendy was a top star leading a wrestling revolution alongside Cyndi Lauper and riding the rock and wrestling wave. The next, she was out. No explanation, no warning, no respect. That kind of behind-the-scenes power play showed how easily personal grudges and business decisions could completely derail a wrestler's career, especially if you were a woman. Some fans and wrestling historians believe that this moment didn't just hurt Wendy, it set women's wrestling back in the WWF. After her exit, the spotlight on the women's division faded, and it would take years before it bounced back again. The energy and momentum Wendy helped create were suddenly gone. But despite everything, Wendy didn't let it define her. She moved on from the WWF and kept wrestling in other promotions, including the AWA, as well as in Puerto Rico and Japan. She continued doing what she loved, even though the WWF door had been slammed shut. Eventually, Wendy stepped away from the ring entirely and took her life in a whole new direction. She went back to school, earned a master's degree in occupational therapy, and even got into breeding and showing dogs, a far cry from the wild world of professional wrestling. It was clear she had found peace in her life, even if that peace didn't come from the wrestling world. In 2010, something surprising happened. Wendy Richter was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. It was a big moment, one that many saw as the company extending an olive branch. And while Wendy accepted the honor, it didn't mean she had forgotten the past. She made it clear that she still held strong feelings about how she was treated, especially about the screw job and everything tied to the fabulous Moolah. But hey, there's so much more to Wendy Richter than just all the drama. So let's put the controversy aside for a moment and shine a light on the good times and the great moments that truly defined her career. She wasn't just a strong in-ring performer, she was a symbol of change at a time when women were fighting for respect and visibility in professional wrestling. Her journey, filled with big matches, powerful rivalries, and a mix of backstage battles, helped shape the course of women's wrestling forever. Wendy Richter's wrestling story began back in the late 1970s when she trained at the fabulous Moolah's Wrestling School, officially known as the Lillian Ellison School of Professional Wrestling. But while the school bore Moolah's name, it was actually other well-known wrestlers like Leilani Kai, Judy Martin, and Joyce Grable who helped train her. These early lessons shaped Wendy's style, and it wasn't long before she stepped into the ring for her professional debut in 1979. By the early 1980s, Wendy was already showing promise. In 1982, she was featured in the tag team matches alongside none other than Moolah herself, facing off against Velvet McIntyre and Princess Victoria in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. But it was her partnership with Joyce Grable that really kicked things into high gear. Together, they formed a tough and energetic duo called the Texas Cowgirls. The name fit perfectly. They were strong, fearless, and brought a Southern attitude to every match. The Texas Cowgirls quickly became a serious team to watch. In late 1982, they wrestled across Canada in Stampede Wrestling, continuing their rivalry with Velvet McIntyre and Judy Martin. The back-and-forth battles between those four women would carry on through multiple promotions, including Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling Association, where Wendy also had solo matches and even became close with future wrestling manager Jim Cornette. Cornette liked Wendy so much he made her an honorary member of the Midnight Express. By 1983, Wendy and Joyce Grable were still going strong, now facing off against familiar foes like McIntyre and Penny Mitchell in Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association. The matches were physical, competitive, and full of storytelling. During this time, Wendy and Joyce also became two-time NWA Women's World Tag Team Champions, adding real credibility to their run. Then came a big turning point. In late 1983, Wendy signed with Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, just as the company was preparing for a national explosion. She was brought in to work matches alongside Peggy Lee, continuing her battles with Velvet McIntyre and Princess Victoria. But little did she know, something huge was about to happen that would change her life and the industry forever. In 1984, Vince McMahon had a bold idea: combine the worlds of pop music and professional wrestling. He called it the Rock and Wrestling Connection. To make it work, he brought in pop superstar Cyndi Lauper, whose music video for Girls Just Want to Have Fun had already featured wrestling manager Lou Albano. In this new storyline, Albano would side with WWF Women's Champion, the fabulous Moolah, while Lauper would support Wendy Richter, the rising star set to challenge Moolah for the title. The stage was set for a massive showdown, and it all went down on MTV in a special event called The Brawl to End It All. On July 23, 1984, in front of a national TV audience, Wendy Richter faced the fabulous Moolah in a match that had all the drama and energy of a true main event. In a dramatic finish, Richter managed to lift her shoulder during a double pinfall situation, while Moolah's shoulder stayed down. Just like that, Wendy became the new WWF Women's Champion. This wasn't just any title win. In storyline terms, she ended what was promoted as Moolah's 28-year championship reign, the longest in wrestling history. While that reign was a bit of a stretch, it didn't change the fact that Wendy's victory was massive. It gave women's wrestling a huge moment in the spotlight, and the MTV broadcast pulled in record ratings. This match officially kicked off the rock and wrestling era, a wild, colorful time when wrestling became part of pop culture, thanks in large part to Wendy Richter and Cyndi Lauper. Wendy quickly became a household name. She had star power, talent, and a catchphrase to match, calling herself 150 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal. She appeared in Lauper's music video for She Bop and was even featured as a cartoon character on the CBS Saturday morning show Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. For a moment, it felt like the sky was the limit. But success in wrestling doesn't always come without tension. Wendy's next big feud was with Leilani Kai, a former ally turned rival who was also trained by Moolah. In early 1985, Kai shocked fans by defeating Richter for the women's title during the war to settle the score. But just 1 month later, Wendy got her revenge, regaining the championship at the very first WrestleMania in front of a packed Madison Square Garden crowd. That win helped cement her place in history. Despite her rising star, things behind the scenes weren't going so smoothly. Wendy started having serious disagreements with Vince McMahon, especially over her pay. She believed she wasn't getting what she deserved and often refused to sign the new contracts the WWF was offering. She thought she was still under her original 5-year agreement and didn't see why she needed to sign anything else. That conflict led to one of the most shocking betrayals in wrestling history. On November 25, 1985, Wendy was scheduled to defend her title at Madison Square Garden against a mysterious masked opponent known only as the Spider. But something was off from the start. Wendy was surprised to see Moolah backstage, especially since Moolah usually never showed up to shows she wasn't working. That night during the match, the Spider suddenly broke from the planned routine. In a rushed and awkward finish, Wendy was pinned after just a 1 count. The referee, who was clearly in on the plan, called for the bell anyway. The crowd was confused, so was Wendy. Furious, she kept fighting after the bell and eventually pulled off the Spider's mask, revealing none other than the fabulous Moolah. It was a setup. This moment became known as the original Screwjob, years before the more famous one involving Bret Hart in 1997. It was widely reported that Vince McMahon orchestrated the whole thing to take the title off Richter, punishing her for refusing to sign a new deal. Wendy was livid. She stormed out of the building, still in her gear, hopped into a cab, and flew out of New York that same night. She never spoke to Moolah again. Even after that betrayal, Wendy didn't stop wrestling. She traveled across the US, Puerto Rico, and Japan, continuing to compete in various promotions. In Puerto Rico's World Wrestling Council, she feuded with Monster Ripper and captured the WWC Women's Championship twice in 1987. Later that year, she showed up in the American Wrestling Association and immediately went after AWA Women's Champion Medusa Miceli. Wendy eventually won that title in December 1988. At Super Clash 3, she teamed with the Top Guns to take on Medusa and Bad Company in a mixed tag match, getting the win by pinning her old rival once again. By the 1990s, Wendy started stepping away from wrestling, only making occasional appearances. In 2005, she took part in the Wrestle Reunion events, teaming up with other female legends for multi-woman matches. Though she wasn't wrestling full-time, fans still remembered her impact. Life after wrestling took Wendy in a totally different direction. She earned a master's degree in occupational therapy and began working in the healthcare field. She also found joy in raising and showing dogs, stepping far away from the spotlight of the wrestling world. But even with her new path, the past never fully faded. On June 16, 2012, she returned to WWE television for a segment with Cyndi Lauper and Layla, celebrating the legacy of rock and wrestling. And most recently, during a 2023 AEW press conference, women's champion, timeless Toni Storm, jokingly challenged Wendy Richter by name, shouting, "Wendy Richter, I'm going to fuck you up." It was a playful moment, but also a reminder that Wendy's name still carries weight in the wrestling world. Richter's journey wasn't easy, and yes, it was full of ups and downs. But her courage, her talent, and her refusal to back down helped change the game for women in wrestling. She stood up for herself when it mattered most. And even though it cost her a spot on the main stage for a while, it earned her something even more powerful: respect. And that brings us to the end of today's video. But don't worry, there's plenty more on the way. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like and let us know in the comments what you'd love to see next.
I come into the monitor. I was in the back there looking at the monitor. A drunk Indian was out here again. I know it was full of whiskey. Shut up out there. That drunken Indian got some feathers. Somewhere along the line, I'll tear him up again. I noticed one other thing.
Imagine being at the peak of your athletic career, only to have it abruptly cut short by racism and injuries. From confronting racism head-on throughout his life to dying a tragic death, this is his story, and you have to hear about it. Born on November 28, 1938, in Rayville, Louisiana, Ernie Ladd grew up with a natural talent for sports. His family moved to Orange, Texas, when he was still young, and it was there that his athletic abilities really started to shine. In high school, he wasn't just good, he was exceptional. He excelled in both football and basketball, making it clear that he had the physical talent to go far. His athleticism was undeniable, and soon enough, he was off to Grambling State University on a basketball scholarship. But it didn't take long for Ladd to show that football was just as much his game. Alongside his teammate Buck Buchanan, Ladd became part of one of the most feared defensive line duos in college football. Things were going just fine for him until one day God rewrote his story. After an injury in 1969 cut his football career short, Ladd turned to wrestling. What started as a way to stay busy during the offseason quickly became his full-time gig. But he didn't want to be just another wrestler. He wanted to stand out. That's when the Big Cat was born. The name fit his size and surprising agility in the ring, but it was his larger-than-life personality that really set him apart. Ladd became one of the most hated heels in wrestling, and he loved every minute of it. Back then, it was rare for a black man to play such a dominant villain, but Ladd didn't care about breaking that mold. He was cocky, confident, and had no problem talking trash. He'd roast announcers by calling them Mr. TV Announcer and take shots at his opponents with one-liners that had the crowd going wild. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a character who knew exactly how to work the crowd. But Ladd didn't just rely on his mic skills. He brought the same power, presence, and dominance to the ring. His size and athleticism made him a tough opponent for just about anyone. He fought against some of the biggest names in wrestling, like Andre the Giant, Dusty Rhodes, and Bruno Sammartino. What made his matches with Andre the Giant particularly special was that Ladd was one of the few wrestlers who could stand toe-to-toe with the 500-pound giant. That was a rarity in a sport where most wrestlers look small next to Andre. And Ernie Ladd is one of those wrestlers whose career is hard to forget, not just because of the titles he won, but because of the impact he had on the world of professional wrestling. After leaving WWE in 1980, Ladd kept on pushing boundaries, collecting titles and making a name for himself all over the United States and even Puerto Rico. His championship list is long, and it includes the NWA Florida Heavyweight Championship, NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship, NWA America's Heavyweight Championship 3 times, and many more. What makes his story even more incredible is that Ladd didn't stick to just one place. He wrestled in so many territories, from California to Florida, Georgia, and even Japan. He spent a lot of time in the Mid-South area, near his home in Franklin, Louisiana, where he made a huge name for himself. His success in all these places helped solidify his place as one of the top wrestlers of his time. Ladd's impact was so big that he was inducted into both the WCW Hall of Fame in 1994 and the WWF Hall of Fame in 1995, making him the first person ever to be honored by both. That's no small feat. But Ladd's journey wasn't just about winning titles and being a wrestling star. It was about something much bigger. He had to deal with the ugly reality of racism, both in his personal life and in the wrestling industry. When Ladd was young, his family moved away from northern Louisiana to escape the racism they faced. Ladd was always outspoken about inequality, but his views on politics were more complicated than just fighting racism. He was a lifelong Republican, and he encouraged African Americans to join the party. He believed in personal responsibility and thought it was important for black people to have a diversity of political views. So even though many warned him not to return to the South, Ladd went back to Louisiana to pursue his wrestling career. He wanted to change the way African Americans in the South thought about politics, and he was determined to do it, no matter the risks. Ladd didn't just break barriers as a wrestler, he did it behind the scenes too. He became a booker for NWA Mid-South Promotions, which was huge. In simple terms, a booker is responsible for planning the matches and storylines, shaping the direction of the promotion. At the time, it was almost unheard of for a black person to hold a position like that. But Bill Watts, the owner of Mid-South Wrestling, saw something special in Ladd and trusted him with this major role. It wasn't just about getting the job done, it was about using that position to make real change. Ladd had seen firsthand the racism in football, and now in wrestling, he was in a position to do something about it. As a booker, Ladd used his power to give more opportunities to black wrestlers. He pushed for African American talent to get more recognition, and he worked hard to attract a more diverse audience. Ladd wasn't just looking out for himself. He wanted to make the wrestling world better for everyone. One of his biggest moves was getting the Junkyard Dog to become a major star in the Mid-South territory. But pushing for change wasn't easy. Ladd faced a lot of backlash, including from Bill Watts, who started getting hate mail and even death threats because of the changes Ladd was pushing for. This shows just how hard Ladd's work was, especially in a time when racism was deeply ingrained in the wrestling world. But despite all the resistance, Ladd kept fighting. He knew that it was worth it to make the wrestling industry a fairer and equal place for future generations of black wrestlers. Now, Ladd's relationship with Bill Watts is an interesting part of the story. On one hand, Jim Ross, a close friend of Ladd, described Ladd and Watts as being like brothers. But on the other hand, Watts was known to use racial slurs towards Ladd. Despite that, Ladd often gave Watts a pass, believing that Watts didn't mean any harm. Others, like Jake Roberts, saw Watts differently, calling him a racist bully who didn't respect Ladd. This complicated relationship is a perfect example of how business and personal feelings can sometimes clash, especially in a time when racism was still very much a part of the culture in the South. Ladd's story shows that wrestling was just one part of his fight for equality. He didn't just want to be a champion in the ring, he wanted to create real change both inside and outside of the ring. He faced a lot of challenges, but his impact on the wrestling world is undeniable. His efforts paved the way for black wrestlers who came after him, and his work helped to change the industry for the better. He was working hard day and night to flip the scene and make black wrestlers recognizable. Although he did succeed to some extent, life threw a heavier battle his way. Sadly, in 2004, Ernie Ladd was given some devastating news. He had cancer. It started in his colon and quickly spread to his stomach and bones. For the next 3 years, Ladd fought with everything he had, but eventually the cancer took its toll. The man who had once seemed invincible was now facing his toughest battle. But here's the thing about Ernie Ladd. His physical body might have been breaking down, but his spirit, that remained as strong as ever. After years of hard-hitting football and wrestling, his body had taken a beating. By the end, Ladd was often confined to a wheelchair because of bad knees, knee problems that stemmed from the physical demands of his career. But despite the pain and limitations, Ladd's will to live was unmatched. In 2005, his doctors gave him a grim diagnosis. They told him he had only 3 to 6 months to live. But instead of accepting that fate, Ladd responded with incredible faith. He told them, "I told him, doctor, Jesus has the verdict on me." And those words, "Dr. Jesus has the verdict on me," became something he was known for. Unfortunately, Ladd passed away on March 10, 2007, at the age of 68 in his hometown of Louisiana. He left behind his wife Rosalind, with whom he had spent more than 45 years, their 4 children, and over a dozen grandchildren. His death was a moment that made many people reflect on how much his career in sports had affected him. No one can say for sure if his cancer was connected to his time in football or wrestling, but there's no denying that his body took a heavy toll from years of intense physical work. His knee problems that left him in a wheelchair were a visible reminder of how demanding those sports can be, and that kind of strain can follow an athlete for life. But this is not a sob story. Ernie Ladd wasn't just known for his struggles. He was a legend, and his legacy is about far more than just the battles he fought with his body. Ladd holds the unique distinction of being inducted into both the American Football League Hall of Fame and the World Wrestling Federation Hall of Fame. Think about that. 2 Hall of Fames in 2 completely different sports. That's incredibly rare. Most athletes are lucky to be great in one sport, but Ladd excelled in both football and wrestling, proving just how versatile and talented he was. But that's not all. Ladd was also inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame in 1994, the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame, and the Museum of the Gulf Coast Sports Hall of Fame. In 2004, he was honored in the San Diego Hall of Champions. Even though Ladd passed away in 2007, his story is still one that people talk about today. His impact continues to inspire. Sure, he was known for his size and strength on the football field and in the wrestling ring, but what really set him apart was his resilience. He wasn't just a physical powerhouse. He was a symbol of what it means to keep going, even when things get tough. And let's be real, his fight against cancer showed the world that real strength isn't just about how big you are, but about how strong your spirit is. Ernie Ladd's legacy isn't just about football or wrestling, it's about the way he lived his life. He faced his biggest battle with grace and faith, showing everyone that even when you're knocked down, you can still stand tall. His story reminds us that no matter what life throws at us, we can find a way to keep fighting. And just like Ladd did, we can always find strength in our faith, in our communities, and in the people who love us. So that's the story of Ernie Ladd, a man who was so much more than just an athlete. His life continues to inspire people all over the world, and his message of strength, resilience, and faith will live on forever. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more wrestling stories like this one.
Accompanied by Hot Steps. Thank you. You know you're so good, but I'm so much better.
Every girl's dream, your television champion, Hot Stuff, Eddie Gilbert.
Imagine being at the peak of your game, on your way to a huge opportunity, and then having it all ripped away in an instant. That's what happened to Eddie Gilbert, and the car accident that nearly ended his life was just the beginning of his tragic story. Eddie Gilbert was one of those guys who seemed born for wrestling. He grew up around it. His dad, Tommy Gilbert, was a wrestler, so Eddie was basically raised backstage. From the time he was a little kid, all he wanted was to be part of the business. His mom said that by 2nd grade, he was already hooked. He wasn't just watching matches, he was booking fake shows in his room with real wrestlers, real arenas, full storylines. He was all in. Before he was even a teenager, he was ringside, taking photos and writing about wrestling. He just understood it. Not just the action, but the storytelling and why it mattered. That never changed. It stuck with him his whole life. For starters, he started out in Memphis, wrestling alongside his dad. Then he went by Tommy Gilbert Jr. for a while. But people noticed him right away. He had talent, he had charisma, and he had a mind for the business. That's what really made him stand out. He wasn't just a good wrestler, he had ideas, big ones. His creativity really showed when he created this character called Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. Loud, flashy, a little cocky, and fans loved it. He knew how to play a character that got attention. It wasn't long before bigger promotions came knocking. In 1982, he got a shot with WWF. Huge opportunity. They put him in a storyline as Bob Backlund's protege. Backlund was the champ at the time, so that was a big vote of confidence. They saw something in Eddie, and things were supposed to change for him, but then something terrible happened. In May of 1983, Eddie Gilbert's life changed forever. At the time, he was a rising star in the world of professional wrestling. He was working with the WWF and was said to be on his way to an important meeting with Vince McMahon Sr. That meeting never happened. On the way there, Eddie was involved in a serious car accident that left him with life-threatening injuries. What followed wasn't just a setback. It was the beginning of a long, painful journey that would deeply affect the rest of his life. The crash was brutal. Eddie broke his neck. He also suffered major injuries to his heart, arms, chest, and back. Doctors told him he might never wrestle again. His facial injuries were so bad that he had to undergo plastic surgery. Later on, he grew a beard to hide the scars from the accident. For someone whose career depended on both physical ability and appearance, it was a devastating blow. But Eddie didn't give up. Incredibly, just 3 months later, in August 1983, he returned to the wrestling ring. Fans and people in the industry saw it as an amazing comeback. Many said it showed his passion for wrestling and his refusal to quit. He himself said he was inspired by people like Bob Backlund, another wrestler known for his toughness and determination. However, behind that quick return was a lot of pain. Coming back so soon after such serious injuries meant Eddie still needed help to get through the day. That help came in the form of strong painkillers. And that's where the real trouble started. What looked like a story of strength and recovery was actually the beginning of a long struggle with addiction. After his time in the WWF and a car accident that nearly ended his career, Eddie Gilbert found new life in the Southern wrestling scene. He came back stronger, with a new attitude and a new name. Now calling himself Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, he played the role of an arrogant, loudmouth villain. Fans loved to hate him. This version of Eddie wasn't just a great performer in the ring. He also started to show his real strength behind the scenes as someone who could plan matches, tell stories, and shape entire shows. This all came together in Mid-South Wrestling, which later became the Universal Wrestling Federation. It was one of the top promotions in the South, and Eddie made a big impact there. He formed a villain group called Hot Stuff International. It included young, up-and-coming wrestlers like Sting, Rick Steiner, and the man who would become the Ultimate Warrior. These guys weren't stars yet, but Eddie saw something in them and gave them a chance to shine. Fans and insiders started noticing that Eddie was more than just a performer. He had a natural talent for writing storylines, building characters, and keeping crowds invested. In 1988, he was voted Best Booker by the Wrestling Observer newsletter. That meant people in the business saw him as one of the smartest minds in wrestling at the time. He also worked in the Continental Wrestling Federation in Alabama, where he teamed up with a young Paul Heyman. The two would work together again later, and both would go on to influence wrestling in big ways. One of Eddie's most talked about moments happened in Memphis. He and his brother Doug created a scene where they ran over Jerry Lawler, the top star, with a car in the TV station's parking lot. It was filmed so well that fans actually called the police. It felt real, and that was exactly what Eddie wanted. Lawler even had to go on TV to explain that it was just part of the show. That stunt showed exactly how far Eddie was willing to go to get a reaction. He wanted fans to be shocked, angry, and fully hooked. Eddie's booking style came from instinct, not just planning. He knew what would get people talking. He knew how to make them care, and he wasn't afraid to be the bad guy if it helped the story. He often made himself the center of the action, not to steal the spotlight, but because he knew how to make a crowd love or hate him. He once said he would go to jail for a week if it meant getting a storyline over with the fans. He believed in going all in. Then, in 1993, Eddie Gilbert took over the creative direction of a small wrestling company in Philadelphia. It was called Eastern Championship Wrestling, also known as ECW. It was still just starting out, but Eddie Gilbert helped give the company a strong identity that would later make it stand out. Eddie liked wild matches, real-looking fights, and anything that felt different from what fans were used to. He wanted ECW to feel exciting and dangerous. That became the heart of ECW's style later on. He also brought in someone he had worked with before, a young and smart wrestling mind named Paul Heyman. Paul became Eddie's assistant and helped him with planning the shows. The man who started ECW, Todd Gordon, gave Eddie a lot of credit for helping to build the company. Todd once said, "Without Eddie, there would be no ECW." Eddie had a big imagination. He was not afraid to try new things. He also brought in some important wrestlers. One of them was Shane Douglas, who later became a big part of ECW. Shane said Eddie was the reason he joined. For a while, Eddie even owned nearly half of the company. But things started to fall apart. People around Eddie noticed he was acting strange. He started showing up late to events. He seemed paranoid and stressed. Some people believed he was having problems with painkillers. Paul Heyman said Eddie was no longer the same person. He looked tired and seemed like he was struggling a lot. Things got worse at an event called Ultra Clash. Eddie believed Paul was working behind his back with another promoter named Jim Crockett Jr. Eddie thought he was going to be fired, so he quit the company. Later, he tried to come back, but it was too late. Todd Gordon had already decided to move forward without him. At that same event, Eddie tried to speak to the fans in the building, but Paul told the sound team to cut off Eddie's microphone. Eddie's brother, Doug Gilbert, was so angry that he got into a fight with people backstage. That was the moment when the relationship between Eddie and Paul was officially over. After that night, Paul Heyman took over full creative control of ECW. Paul would go on to turn ECW into one of the most unique and talked about wrestling companies of the 1990s. But even though Paul made it famous, it was Eddie who helped create the early style and attitude. Eddie was the one who believed wrestling could be wild, rough, and different. He helped build the foundation. He even brought Paul in and helped guide him during the early days. The friendship between Eddie and Paul is a big part of this story. They were once very close. Paul used to call Eddie his mentor and his best friend. But Eddie's personal problems ruined their friendship. His behavior, his drug use, and his constant stress pushed people away. When Paul cut his microphone that night, it showed that Eddie was no longer trusted. Eddie later said that Paul had learned too well from him. That quote makes it clear that Eddie felt hurt and replaced by the person he had once helped. Eddie's time in ECW lasted only about 6 months. This was not the first time something like this had happened. Many people noticed that Eddie often started strong in a new job, but then ran into problems. In other companies, he sometimes clashed with other leaders. But in ECW, he had freedom and control. Still, things went wrong. That showed his biggest challenges came from inside himself. His own actions were the reason he lost control. Like I said already, he was battling addiction, emotional pain, and broken relationships. These battles affected every part of his life, from his work to the people who loved him. Eddie was married twice. Both of these marriages were short and ended badly. His first marriage was to Missy Hyatt, a well-known wrestling manager. They got married in 1987 and were together until 1989. Missy has shared many stories about Eddie. Some of them are sweet. She said Eddie loved wrestling more than anything else in the world. He looked up to Jerry Lawler, a famous wrestler, as his hero. One time, Missy gave Eddie one of Lawler's crowns as a gift. Eddie was so happy, like a kid on Christmas. That showed how deeply he cared about wrestling. But there were also hard times in their relationship. Missy said Eddie was unfaithful to her. He cheated, and that hurt their marriage. She also said he seemed very unhappy during his time working for WCW. He had no hobbies or outside interests. Wrestling was all he cared about. So when things went badly at work, it affected his mood and his behavior. Without anything else to turn to, Eddie became more miserable. His second marriage was to Medusa, also known as Deborah McKelly, who was also a big name in wrestling. Their marriage in 1990 was very short and very painful. Medusa has spoken openly about how bad things were. She said Eddie had a serious problem with pills. He would take so many that he passed out in his food. He threw up a lot. One day she found hundreds of empty pill bottles by his bed. She was shocked and scared. Medusa also felt like Eddie was jealous of her. She was doing well in her wrestling career, and she thought that made Eddie feel worse about himself. He wanted to succeed but kept falling short of what he hoped for. That made him angry and hurt his confidence. Their marriage ended after a big fight. Medusa begged Eddie to get help. Instead, he threw things at her. She left him, feeling like the man she had loved was gone. She said he had changed completely, and she no longer recognized the person he had become. Even though both Missy and Medusa had bad experiences with Eddie, they later became friends. They talked about what they had gone through and found comfort in each other. Medusa even joked that Missy was her sister wife. This bond between them shows how deep and painful their time with Eddie had been. They were two women who had cared for the same man, but were both hurt by his addiction and behavior. His brother Doug Gilbert and fellow wrestler Dutch Mantell both noticed something was wrong. Doug said he did not think it was that bad at first, but later saw how serious it was. Dutch said Eddie often ignored people's concerns. Even when friends tried to talk to him, Eddie would push them away or pretend everything was fine. People described Eddie in two very different ways. Some said he was kind, funny, and full of ideas. Others said he was moody, hard to work with, and sometimes angry. Addiction can change a person. Eddie went from being someone who was full of life to someone who was hurting inside and struggling to keep things together. Then in early 1995, Eddie went to Puerto Rico to work as a booker for the World Wrestling Council. He had just finished a short job at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, where he only stayed for one taping. Jim Cornette, the owner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, later said he never saw Eddie again after that show. In Puerto Rico, Eddie was doing what he loved. He was still booking matches, writing storylines, and coming up with creative ideas. His brother Doug found notes Eddie had written. One of the notes was about Eddie wrestling a real bear. It was a wild idea, but it showed that Eddie still had his big imagination. Sadly, Eddie's time in Puerto Rico would be his last. On February 18, 1995, he was found dead in his apartment. He had died in his sleep from a heart attack. He was only 33 years old. Fellow wrestler Ken Wayne found him. Eddie had missed a meeting and was not answering the door. After knocking all day, Ken and others entered through a window and found Eddie in bed. It was clear he had been gone for a while. Eddie's family believed the car crash from 1983 had hurt his heart. They thought the painkillers made it worse over time. His father, Tommy Gilbert, and his brother Doug both said the crash played a big role in his death. Doug also admitted that they had made bad choices, possibly talking about drug use. Eddie died alone, far from home, doing the thing he loved most. His body had taken too much damage. Years of pain, stress, and addiction had taken their toll. Even though his mind was still working and full of ideas, his body could no longer keep up. The way Ken Wayne found him, quiet, unresponsive, and alone, was a heartbreaking end for someone who had once lit up rooms with his personality. People still wonder what could have been. Eddie had so much talent. If he had lived longer, if he had gotten help, maybe he could have done more great things. His story is filled with what-ifs. He left behind fans, friends, and family who saw his potential and felt the pain of his early death. Eddie Gilbert is remembered today not just for what he did in the ring, but for the deep struggles he faced. His story is a reminder of how important it is to care for your mental and physical health. Talent and passion are powerful, but without balance and support, they can fade too soon. Eddie gave everything to wrestling. In the end, it may have taken everything from him.